Okay, and before we get started, Kate Horton, could I ask you to do me a favor? And can you, once we start presenting, could you monitor the lobby and just make sure that folks are getting in? That would be very, very helpful.
Got it.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so it is 9:02. We're gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to today's Coffee and Conversations session on today, November 20th, 2024. We're very excited today. We're joined by various AOE staff as well as some esteemed guest speakers that we're excited to hear from today. I'm going to just kind of do a quick rundown of today's meeting. We'll go over just kind of an informal agenda, and then I will turn it over to our guests. Okay. So today's agenda is really going to be focused around a conversation about school safety. And kind of within that, really focused on building school safety partnerships with your local emergency management partners and how that piece is just so, so critical to school safety in general, and then also particularly helpful in the development of your all hazards emergency operations plans. So we'll get to that here shortly. I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name's Taylor Goodwin. I am the Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator here at the AOE on the operations team. Typically, I think most of us are used to seeing my colleague Courtney O'Brien usually presenting. She's out of office today, so I am going to be hosting in her stead. And just as a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to just pop those in the chat, or you can always use that raise hand function. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share some slides for us today. Or at least I think I am. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. I swear I practiced this before everybody got here, but there's always a fun little hiccup. Okay. Can somebody just pop off of mute and let me know if you can see my slides?
We do not see any slides.
You do not see them. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, can you see them now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yay. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So as another little reminder, here is a list of our hosts for today, all of our wonderful AOE staff who were involved in Coffee and Conversations. Big thanks to all of these amazing people for helping kind of keep this ship running. So thank you all so much. Moving right along to kind of to prime us for this conversation about school safety partnerships, especially having to do with our EOPs. I thought it would be nice to just do a quick rundown of just some information about those EOPs. So as some of you all probably already know, under Act 29 of 2023, all public schools and all approved and recognized independent schools shall, one, develop an EOP, emergency operations plan, in collaboration with local emergency management partners and first responders. We've also provided a link here to reach those particular partners. There should be a link to a list of those within your area. And if you have any issues with that list, you can just send me an email and let me know. Schools are also tasked with maintaining an EOP that is at least as comprehensive as the AOE created All Hazards Emergency Operations Plan template. So you do not necessarily have to use the template, but whatever you do use needs to be as comprehensive and as robust as that template. And there is a link provided here. I will also be dropping these slides in the chat, so don't feel like you have to try to chase these links down. They will be provided to you. If you would like to, you can also use another document that we created. It's the All Hazards Emergency Operations Planning Guide, and this really serves as kind of an accompanying document to help guide you while you're creating your EOP. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the template. So you are more than welcome to use that if you wish. The last requirement that we have here is to have a completed EOP in place and ready to go by July 1 of this year, which has obviously already passed. So if you have any further questions about any of these requirements, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other contacts that I'm going to be dropping here in the chat. Also note that the EOP needs to be completed, but it doesn't actually have to be submitted anywhere. You just need to have it ready to go. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And here is a slide with, again, just a lot of resources that we're working on developing for our EOPs. One of the things that we are really excited to be able to offer is something called our EOP office hours. So we are very, very lucky to have some really well-practiced and very experienced subject matter experts. Most of them are on this call right now, and they're going to be hosting some EOP office hours. So if you have any questions about your EOP, about developing it, about maybe which annexes you need to include, just really any and all questions, our colleagues Sunny Erickson and Rob Evans are going to be hosting this. They're going to host it on the third Thursday of every month from about noon to 1. And that's going to be starting up in January. So we will be sharing that link out with you. And we highly encourage you to take that opportunity to really reach out and ask whatever questions you have. Because our colleagues over at Vermont School Safety Center have a lot of knowledge and are ready and excited to share that with you. Below, we also have some web resources that, again, those are going to be available in the slide decks that we're going to be sending out momentarily. And I would like to point out just a couple of things that are a little bit new. We now have access to the Vermont Emergency Management Training Calendar, which is going to be tremendously helpful, I think. They're very graciously starting to put some relevant school safety trainings on their calendars that we'll be able to see and access. So please feel free to check that out. Also, I will point out that the Vermont School Safety Center is working on piloting a new monthly school safety newsletter that really is meant to be kind of an informational hub of just all things school safety related. And we're hoping to send that out hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So we're very excited about that one. Okay, moving right along. Another thing just to keep in mind, and again, we're going to be sending this out to you soon, so don't feel like you have to memorize it. There's a really great EOP development for rural schools training that's going to be coming up in February. And that is going to be put on by REMS, the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center. REMS has a lot of really great resources, and we're super excited that they're going to be able to put on this great training for us. So save the date and just be aware that that link is going to be coming soon. And again, if you have any questions related to school safety, particularly around those physical school safety measures, like a lot of us do since Act 29 has been passed, our Vermont School Safety Center members are really going to be your go-to for that. So I left their contact information here. Again, that's Sunny Erickson and Rob Evans. Some of you already know and have good relationships built with them. And then just kind of a reminder that they have some really great web resources as well. And I'll be dropping those emails in the chat. Okay. So I think that's all from me for now. So I am really, really excited to be able to introduce a few of our guest speakers today. Our guest speakers are from members of the Vermont School Safety Center. Again, Sunny Erickson and Rob Evans. Sunny comes to us from Vermont Emergency Management, and then Rob, a lot of you may already know, works as the School Safety Liaison Officer. So both very esteemed partners, and we're very glad to be able to have them today. And also joining us is Chief Sean Burke from the South Burlington Police Department. And Chief Burke, I hope you don't mind me mentioning that you just came back from a very late flight last night. So we are thrilled that you were able to join us. So thank you all again for making time to speak to us today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to turn those controls back over to Sunny.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Sunny Erickson, School Safety Program Manager with Vermont Emergency Management under the Department of Public Safety. I co-chair with Rob Evans, the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, and I'm excited to be here today with my esteemed colleagues. Also, Chief Burke sits on that crisis planning team as well, representing Police Chiefs Association. So you really have some great subject matter expertise here. Chief is going to be able to provide us some information about first responder collaboration with emergency planning and response. So I will turn it over to Rob while I go ahead and share my screen so that he can introduce himself, and then maybe we can turn it over to Chief Burke as well for a brief intro.
Yeah, good morning, Sunny and Taylor. Thanks for the great introduction. It's great to see some really familiar faces
Let me refresh.
that are on the screen with us, and so many people that are interested get to learn a little bit more about the Emergency Operations Plan. And I know while there's a variety of folks that are in different stages of the planning process, I would say that Sunny and I are always available to provide some feedback on the plans, policies, and procedures that you already have or are working on. So don't wait to get it completed. If you're looking for some additional guidance, we're always available in email or through a phone call to either one of us to assist with that. I also want to say that, in parallel to what we're doing right now, we've got about 40 or 50 people that are in the behavioral threat assessment training that's taking place this morning. And I know a lot of you have team members or school safety stakeholders that are on that call. Just to keep you all informed, there's going to be an additional training that's taking place in December, as well as one additional training sometime after the first of the year, date to be determined, that we will share with you. So let's make sure that we've got good participation with that. Sunny, I think we're probably well over 1,000 folks across the state now that have been trained in behavioral threat assessment. So that's really great stuff as well. As Sunny mentioned, Chief Sean Burke is joining us from South Burlington. He's got a depth of knowledge, not only in the first responder world, but working with his schools in South Burlington. He's been a longstanding member of the School Crisis Planning Team. And I believe next year he may be taking over as the Chiefs Association president. So, Chief, anything you need to say before we kick right into this? I know Sunny's going to do some slides, and then we'll get into just some first responder collaboration. But I'll turn it over to you for a quick intro.
No, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's truly an honor. Great intro by Sunny and Rob, and let's roll right into it.
Okay, excellent. So as Taylor had mentioned, we have the emergency operation plan template that's up and available on the website. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and the guide, which is a very helpful resource as you work through filling out the EOPs for your individual schools. But Rob and the chief and I thought that we might take some time to go through the all hazards EOP threat specific annexes, because that is an area that some folks might find challenging to develop. So we thought we would take some time this morning just to sort of walk through the process and what it entails, and answer any questions that might arise for you. Oops. There we go. So first of all, as you're developing these emergency operation plans, you should really be incorporating your crisis and emergency planning teams. So having all core planning team members is a really important part. You want to have multiple voices and multiple perspectives at the table when you're working through each of the potential challenges or potential threats that you're going to be including in your emergency operation plans and specifically in your threat hazard annexes. So you want to work with your key stakeholders within your whole community to ensure that everyone is aware of the procedures and everyone gets a chance to practice that with drills and exercises. and that everyone knows what their responsibilities will be as they're outlined. So everyone knows what the expectations are and has the chance to exercise those so that they're able to meet them in response to a crisis. So let's start with an overview of what a threat annex is. So a threat annex is a document that describes the actions that will be taken in response to a specific threat or hazard. So these are really key parts of the EOP, and they're going to be based on special planning requirements that are not going to be similar across the board for each school. Each school is going to be different in its location, in its surrounding environments, in its community. And so each school really needs to take a look at what might be impacting their school and what needs to be considered, because it's not going to be a universal, sort of design for these threat annexes. So threat annexes can include, the way that the details in your response mechanisms. It's going to include a full view of any risk or threat areas and your evacuation from those threats should a crisis happen. It's going to include things about your emergency public information, both internal for your school system as well as external for parents and community. It might include things about protective equipment that your school might have based on your circumstances for responders to respond to any crises that arise. And then you also want to have an area that has maps of the schools, charts of inventory or potential things that need attention to in the event that a crisis arises. And of course, once you have these plans in place, really practice makes perfect. So Act 29 does outline the number of drills and the specific types of drills that you need to conduct, but really having trainings with your emergency planning groups or your crisis management groups. I know different places call them different names, but having the opportunity to walk through some trainings and exercises really helps you identify where your school is strong in response, and it also might point out areas where there's gaps that can be addressed for improvement. So just some examples of types of trainings and exercises are, facilitated discussions where you're sitting around and walking through something in a more discussion-based scenario. Tabletop exercises where you might have, charts and graphs and you're moving pieces and pulling out plans and looking at different ways to respond to a crisis. And then you can work all the way up to functional exercises, which is sort of the big the big production where you have people in the field moving buses, moving students. But under Vermont Emergency Management, we follow the Homeland Security exercise and evaluation program mechanisms, and you do need to start with small steps to get to the big functional exercises. So Rob and I are happy to work with school systems, either on a school by school or district or supervisory union basis, to walk through exercises. And we can start small and work our way up to the bigger functional exercises. And we have plenty of resources, both at Vermont Emergency Management and the Department of Public Safety, as well as we have great partnerships across the board with our multiple stakeholders and AOE and all of the agencies. So I just think that I wanted to promote that that's a really valuable resource for folks as they're exercising their plans. And by partaking,
if I could just comment on that and just how important it is to not just tabletop with the leadership of the district and a specific principal for a specific school, but incorporate the first response community in those tabletop exercises as well. Because not only exercising the decision-making process internally within the school or the school district, but obviously if our first response entities are responding to the school, we need to make sure that they are incorporated into that tabletop exercise process as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. I do want to reiterate how important that is, because by practicing that with your first responder communities, fire, EMS, police, you're going to better understand what you can expect for a response from them, and they will better understand the procedures that they are going to be walking into in the event of a crisis. So thank you, Rob. That's an excellent note. So the purpose of these annexes is that really you're outlining your response to an event. So you're going to describe your goals, which sort of highlight where you want to end up as a result from these annexes, your objectives, which are measurable actions, which are necessary to reach those goals, and then how you're going to get there. So your course of action, which are those specific procedures that you are going to, walk through to get to the end goal. And it's really good to be planning for the full spectrum of the incident. So how you will be approaching it before an incident happens, during it, and then the after math, which is the recovery, recovery phase of an incident. So each of those threat and hazard specific annexes should be describing your courses of action based on each individual threat and hazard. And we will talk about what is called a functional or cross-functional annex, which is those pieces of a response which may be repeated throughout various incidents. So a big one there might be communication, because communication is going to be valuable in every single kind of incident that you are experiencing. Evacuation is another one that's often a cross-functional annex, because evacuations are going to be a part of multiple different types of responses based on, could be a chemical spill in a laboratory, could be, some of those violent, threats of violent actions being taken in the school. Really, evacuation is one of the most frequent ones, and paired with the communication pieces. Those are ones that you are not going to need to include and write out each time. You can just reference them as in each of your threat-specific annexes. And as always, each of the planning teams should be thinking about their local, state, federal regulations that might be in place as or considered as you're developing those annexes, because those might apply to specific threats and hazards. That's also a really good way to have the perspective of local first responders who might be more familiar with those regulations or mandates. And that's another way that they can add great value to the planning process, is by sharing their wealth of knowledge with you as you're planning out those annexes. So I think we talked a little bit about this. Just having with your evacuation annex, that would be something that you can reference in your fire response, in your, threat of violent intruder response, just having a well-documented, especially the evacuation and the communication, as well as the recovery annex too, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But those cross-functional annexes are really important to be well-developed so that you can reference them multiple times, and they're a solid structure that you can refer to. So I'm going to go through just some things for consideration when you're working through your threats and hazards, because as I said, each school is set up differently in their community, in their location, and in the things that they need to be considering while they're developing these threat and hazard annexes. So things like natural threats. Here, we've experienced a lot of flooding recently. So that's probably at the top of the pile for a number of schools throughout our state, but also things like earthquake, severe weather, severe wind. We do get the tropical storms as well. Extreme temperatures has become something that we're seeing a little bit more frequently, as climate change is a thing that we are all experiencing, and that also can swing from the extreme temperatures in the summer months, at the end of your school year, but also there's a lot of camps that run on school grounds during the summer. So those temperature considerations for summer months need to be part of your emergency operation plans and your annexes as well. And swinging to the other side, we're also seeing a lot of wild winter weather these days. So having, winter precipitation annexes in place and procedures that folks can rely on is really important. Considering technological hazards, a lot of schools have laboratories or, perhaps janitorial or facilities areas in which there are chemicals that could be released that could present hazards to the school. If you have a school that's located near a railway or a highway, there needs to be consideration for an accident or a derailment. you never know what's going to be in a particular vehicle that might be traveling down the highway or in a cargo cart on a railroad. So having those special considerations in place for schools that are in close proximity to those things is really important. Same with dam failures. We do have a lot of private as well as public dams within our state, and I think there's fewer schools that might need to have the considerations for dam failures, but it is a very important piece for those schools that might be below where a dam failure would have impacts. Power failures and water failures, those are things that can pop up for any reason. So having those considerations is important as well. Biological hazards, we all just recently went through the pandemic. So I think that we have some experience, with infectious diseases, but COVID is not the only thing. There's also flu and tuberculosis and staph infections. Things like that really need to have at least some parameters set for them and be included in those annexes. That can also include contaminated food outbreaks. There's E. coli and salmonella that can easily be spread by poor food handling that could occur in a kitchen or cafeteria. I know that there's all kinds of food safety parameters in place for those food service workers, but accidents happen, and there should be a response mechanism in place to handle that. And we also had already spoken about the toxic materials that might be in laboratories or in facilities areas. And then there are these scary human-caused threats or adversarial or incidental threats that should be considered. I can say probably 100% of you have a really good fire and evacuation egress plan in place, because that's something that's been required for decades at this point. Active shooters and bomb threats, by now I think that most folks have been trained in either ALICE or run, hide, fight, and there are processes and procedures in place. Really exercising those response mechanisms triggers muscle memory and recall and how you will handle those incidents. But then there are things that are more likely to happen than the active shooters. Domestic violence spilling into the school, non-custodial parents, self-harm or suicide. Things like that also deserve a place in annexes and deserve some planning, energy, and time. Also things to consider are things like cyber attacks, suicide, kidnapping or missing students, bus accidents, and most recently, we've added to this list riot and student demonstration, because we have seen an uptick in, activism through student bodies, and that is something that, as you're working through the evolution of your emergency operation plans, should potentially be considered based on your, community and your student body and the needs within your school systems.
Sunny, as I look at the human-caused threats and vulnerabilities, there used to be a day where we would have maybe one or two of those things that a school across the state has experienced. Literally, as you're going through that slide, I'm going, yep, we've experienced that. Yep, we've experienced that. Every single one of those human-caused events, somewhere within the last 5 or 10 years, a school or a school district has experienced that. So we can't say, not going to happen here, never going to happen here, doesn't take place here. It does. And that's why it's so important that we, really push the envelope on our planning and preparedness for these types of events, because we're not immune to them. So it just made me take pause and say, wow, we really have experienced a lot here in the state over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that brings to mind, Rob, we've been speaking about this with our crisis planning team quite a bit recently, and it's very heavy to think about, but our state has a very high student suicide rate, or attempted self-harm rates are really high with our small demographic compared to the number of incidents that we're seeing happen statewide. And it's a terrible thing to have to be considering and planning for, but as those numbers increase, we do realize that there is a great need to have a plan in place to address not only finding resources for those individual students that are needing some care, but also the school communities at large, which is another part of those threat annexes, is not just the specific threat, but also the caretaking for the rest of the student body and staff as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sunny, and I don't think it's lost on either you nor I that, there's a weight that comes with this type of work, and so we all need to pay attention to the self-care and resiliency of ourselves as well as our staff. I sit on the Child Fatality Review Committee for the state, and one of the things we do is, after a suicide call or incident within a school or a school district, we're usually trying to talk with the principal and superintendents about the impacts of that. And every conversation always comes back to, this isn't the first time that we've experienced it. It's the fifth or the sixth or the seventh time that it's either been a student or a community member that has done a self-harm or a suicide incident within a school or a school district. And again, the weightiness of that and the heavy burden that is shared by our folks, we just have to pay attention to that in our community and have plans in place for that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think we've covered the functional annexes quite a bit, just knowing that there are these key areas that can meet the needs and be referred to in multiple annexes, so that you don't feel like your document of these threat annexes is going to be hundreds of pages. You can refer to specific annexes in multiple different ways for multiple different responses. I again want to just highlight that the collaboration with community partners as you're developing these annexes is key and very important, because the perspectives of different folks might bring to mind a different response mechanism or something that should be included as you're developing those. Let's see. Oh, something that also is quite important. Talking about the cross-functionality of some of these, sometimes it will be that these functions are occurring simultaneously and at the same time. So while you are referring, to your evacuation plan, you may be also putting into place your communication plan and pulling up, references and pieces of your continuity of operation plan, which is, we call it the COOP. And that is the plan that is in place for how you will continue operating, in as normal of a fashion as can be during an incident. But pieces of the COOP plan may be in play as soon as the immediate threat is done, but you haven't returned back to the school. There's some of those pieces are going to be occurring simultaneously. And it's important to remember that it's not just step by step, one by one. Some of these things are going to be overlapping and happening at the same time. So I think what we're going to do is walk through an example of a cross-functional annex, just so that folks have an idea of what we're talking about. And the example that we're going to use here is, I figured since we all have had an experience with pandemic recently, we would use, an outbreak of an infectious disease or something along those lines, a critical illness exposure. And what we're going to do is walk through what the functional annex might look like. And I've provided here a sample of goals and objectives and courses of action, so you understand what you should be considering as you're putting together these annexes. So the functional annex that you see on your screen is a communication and warning annex. So the intention of that is to define the processes for communicating both within your school and to your internal stakeholders, as well as to the external stakeholders, community, parents, both before, during, and after the emergency. So the sample goals and objectives that you should be, thinking about and considering while you're making your plans and procedures. Perhaps you want to create these templates of letters that are easy to refer to get out as soon as you know that there is something going on. You want to be able to really easily refer to a template that will be a first stop notification to, say, parents and the community, to inform them of what's going on. In that communication, you want to identify the spokesperson who is in the appropriate role to perhaps handle any inquiries. That could be the superintendent, a nurse. Some school districts have public information officers, PIOs. So identifying that person, making sure that they're able to handle that responsibility and are available for, potential contact from external stakeholders or internal stakeholders is really important. And then in this scenario, which again is we're using the pandemic here or an infectious disease outbreak, you want to be providing information about promoting, good hygiene, any protective measures that should be taken. And offering suggestions on how people can best address the situation at hand. You want to inform your students, your staff, and your families about these practices. And you want to ensure that there's a system in place for daily communication to let folks know that you are handling it, what you're doing, how they can get more information, what the, even if it's a couple days of an incident, you want to be able to tell them what to expect or when they can expect more information if you don't know exactly, what the next steps are going to be. This is an example of the continuity of operations annex. That would describe how a school will help ensure that the essential functions will continue during an emergency and in the immediate aftermath. So considerations that you might want to put into planning out your COOP annex would be, how are you going to continue to provide continuity for teaching and learning? In the pandemic, we saw a very quick, for the most part, shift to remote learning, distribution of laptops and setting up of everyone's favorite Teams and Zoom and Google Meet. That happened pretty seamlessly. There was a little bit of a period of acclimation, but I feel like from my perspective, most schools did a really good job of having to turn on a dime and do something they've never done before. So having those considerations in place and a part of your continuity of operation plan annex is really important because you're wanting the students to maintain the skills that they've already accumulated during the academic year. You want to continue providing that education and while keeping them safe. You also want to have considerations in there for additional services. A lot of students rely on schools for breakfast and lunch. A lot of schools set up weekend bags or boxes that go home with students that might experience food insecurity. So finding ways to make sure that essential service is continued is really important and should definitely be a part of a continuity of operation plan. You would also want to include in there anything that is required for distance learning, and some of those distance learning considerations might vary based on the needs of your different students, but that should be a really thought out and well-planned annex. And the recovery annex, which is incredibly important because after the initial response and things quiet down, there is going to be a phase of recovery, and having a plan in place is only going to strengthen your ability to handle those times. So in a recovery annex, you want to describe your plans for recovery with the 4 areas of focus for recovery is academic recovery, physical recovery, fiscal recovery, and then the emotional and psychological recovery. So after any critical incident that is, experienced by a school, there will be some emotional, ripples that might be, that might pop up in the days after that. And having, MOUs with local mental health folks is really important. Having support systems for students, faculty, staff, that's going to really ensure success for your recovery phase. So you're going to want to, define how your school or district is going to address each of those things. It could be for a prolonged period or a shorter period. Having plans in place for both short and long-term recovery is really a great way to approach that. And then you want to identify any potential organizations or personnel that might help the school as they're supporting their community. I think a good example of that is, there are some schools that have systems in place to use some of those support dogs. There's a function, a group, I think, based out of Central Vermont that has well-trained and vetted and certified emotional support dogs that can bring in these pets in the aftermath of an incident. And that's one way that some schools have chosen to help their student body recover after an incident that had a lot of emotional weight to it. So we sort of talked about the example annex with the infectious disease. Just sort of a quick review is that you want to outline the way that you're going to limit exposure. In this example, it's an infectious illness, but you want to limit exposure to whatever that threat or hazard is. You want to minimize disruption to the day-to-day activities. You want to constantly have an evolution of protocols and information out to your stakeholders that considers any new knowledge or guidance from professionals. You want to support all of your staff and students based on their individual needs, as well as the needs of the student body at large. And also communicating is always of high importance, because if you are proactive in your communication, then you don't have to be reactive in people reaching out for that information. Setting up the expectations of when information will be available and who it will come from and at what interval they can expect the next update, that will just set you up for success. Okay, we've sort of covered most of those things. So the next couple of slides are going to highlight different ways in which you can set up your annexes both before, during, and after the incident. So in this planning phase, we're speaking about the before the incident has occurred. So before anything has happened, you want to establish and implement your policies and have your procedures in place. Things to consider are what you have, and we're using the same example, infectious illness, what you have currently as your policies, where they can be found. Do teachers know where they can refer to your protocol? Do they know what the expectation is? If you have drilled them or exercised them, then they may have more familiarity with where to find that information. But you need to also consider perhaps there's a substitute teacher that's just come on board and doesn't know what the expectation is. Making sure that those processes to handle anything before it happens are really important. So you want to review and update and establish these policies. You want to have guidelines that specify what the expectations are and what the procedures are going to be in place based on each of the incidents. You want to talk about habits and guidelines, and you want to develop and discuss these scenarios so that you can walk through these situations with your planning team. During the incident, you want to implement those policies and processes. So you want to address the source and scale of the incident. You want to identify the people who are experiencing the negative impacts. You want to identify what your response is going to be. And then according to your guidelines, you adjust if you are closing school, evacuating school, early dismissing. And then of course, if you are evacuating your school, you also need to be having your reunification annexes in place as well. And I know that we're coming up to the end of our time, so I'm going to kind of just go through the next couple a little bit quickly so that we have time for questions and answers. This slide highlights the after the incident. So you're going to, after things have settled down, go back and review and update your policies, see your areas of strength, to note what worked really well, and then also see where there were some gaps, what didn't work well, and how can you address that. If you need to bring in outside support systems to help you do some remediation, that's a good consideration to have and a plan to have in place. And again, even after the incident has sort of closed and ended, continuing to communicate with your stakeholders is really important. This is, and you will receive a copy of this slide deck, which has all of these links embedded in it. But these are sort of the minimum annex recommendations that we have here. And when you hover over each of them, they will bring you to an example provided to you by the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools group, our federal partners. And these are the ones that we think are bare minimums. You can have more, but we definitely want you to be considering putting each of these annexes in place for each of your schools or districts or supervisory unions. And as Taylor had sort of provided earlier, this is another group of resources. Many of them are the same. I will highlight, again, the School Safety Center, a resource hub. It's where we provide all of our information out into the field. Also, I would like to highlight the FEMA Incident Command trainings because those are really valuable. They're free, they're virtual, you can take them in small increments, and that will help you identify response mechanisms and structures. And I just think that they're really wonderful resources to have out there. And I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'll open it back up to Rob, so that I can give my voice a break.
Well, thanks, Sunny, and I appreciate that. And just as a reminder, all of the trainings and training opportunities specifically around incident command, EOP development are on the shared calendar on the Vermont Emergency Management website, which Taylor mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Just in the last few minutes, I wanted to bring in Chief Burke, and obviously, Sunny and I are very sensitive that across the state, we have a variety of different capacities of full-time, part-time, volunteer, first response resources from fire, EMS, and law enforcement. But I thought it would be important to get Chief and the Chief's perspective on how he assists schools in his area with the planning process. So Chief, can you just talk a little bit about from a police experience and singular focus, but for fire and EMS, how important it is for you to be collaborating with your schools as they're developing and revising their EOPs? If you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. So we always have this motto in public safety: it's better to meet before the crisis than during the crisis. And what this opportunity in EOP development, the EOP development process has provided us is a time to discuss roles and responsibilities. We here in South Burlington have done a few of the tabletops, which have been very valuable, even at a very base level, a hazmat, overturned truck, something of that nature, to figure out like who's going to be the communication point at the district level, where does fire, EMS, and the police stand in their respective lanes, and also visiting this notion of using the incident command system. So you have all of the decision makers in one place, and we then can operate within our respective lanes to bring the situation under control in an efficient and safe as possible manner.
And Chief, in your planning processes, I'm assuming that you have collaborated with your schools to identify evacuation locations, routes to those evacuation locations, family reunification sites. When you're doing that, tell me a little bit about the planning for that and how that helps your resources, your assets respond to a critical incident at school.
Yeah, that's a great area of focus, Rob. So what's important is the evacuation points. One, are they going to be safe and accessible for the student population, the school community that you need to move there? From our perspective, how is that going to interface with our need to get assets to the actual incident location? We've seen, across the country that, particularly during mass violence incidents, you get a lot of self-deployed first responders, and that can become overwhelming. So it allows us to take that 35,000 foot view of where, if the student and school community is going to be at this spot, we're going to identify other areas for staging locations and how egress and ingress is going to work in those situations.
Chief, the joint information sharing, not only, as we're responding to an incident, but post-incident, after the incident is over, and how we're communicating with our community about an incident that takes place. Tell me a little bit about, in your area, how that works with your superintendent, with the principal, and you, to ensure that there aren't disparate messages. There aren't conflicting messages. One's that's coming out from law enforcement, one that comes out for the schools, and the challenges that presents if we're not really on the same sheet of music with our communication styles.
Yeah, critical function. One is to get timely, accurate information to the school community out through preferably the school channels in those instances, but then identifying the areas, particularly if it's, there's a criminal investigation afoot of what the police are doing. The investigative steps may have to be a little opaque, but then it's clear to the message recipients that the school is taking these steps. Law enforcement has taken similar steps for immediate security and public safety, but there is also an ongoing criminal investigation that can't be compromised at the time of the incident.
And a lot of times, Chief, I'm assuming that those can be joint messages, because I'm assuming that it would be helpful for a superintendent or a principal to speak in their communication that's going out to their community that we are collaborating with our local law enforcement partners. There's a strength in a messaging like that, where it's not just the police doing one thing and the school doing another. There's a value when a parent, or a community member can see that the school in collaboration with, or we are working with our law enforcement partners. There's a strength in that type of communication, right?
Yeah, certainly. It goes back to your earlier point, Rob. It's a consistent message, and it's one that the community can identify as the reliable source of information, because all of these scenarios now are just simply overwhelmed by what goes out on social media, and we can't really control that in the moment. But as we craft those joint statements in the ensuing moments, we can really kind of correct the information that's out there.
Yeah. And Chief, last thing is obviously, the national swatting incidents that schools and school districts are having to respond to has evolved over the years. And those that are doing this bad thing are getting better and better at doing it. So they become more and more credible just with the information that those that are delivering these calls are making to our law enforcement agencies and to our schools. Evaluating the credibility of those calls when they come in, if they're coming into the school, there's a value of the school immediately calling local law enforcement to get a sense of where we are with this. Can you explain how you can help with the determining the credibility and maybe the connection you have with the VIC to see if this is a statewide process or a national process that's taking place?
Yeah, no, it's super important, because oftentimes we'll have a series of these going on around the state. So we may be aware on the ground because all of the Vermont law enforcement agencies in the state subscribe to one computer-aided dispatch system, so we know what's going on across jurisdictions. The most critical piece that the law enforcement component brings is opening up that channel of communication to the Vermont Intelligence Center, because they will know if this is hitting 12 of our 14 counties or even on a regional area. And we not only see it in the school setting, but we see it with other larger corporations. So when we can leverage the partnership with the VIC and their expertise, we can then get a handle on what the threat is and scale any potential response that's appropriate to any given school that's being affected.
Yep. And Chief, last one, I promise. The planning cadence that you have with your schools and your school communities, I'm assuming you're meeting once a month, every other month. Just tell me a little bit about the cadence of how often you're getting together with your school communities to talk about this type of thing.
Yeah, so during the buildup of the EOP, it's been a lot more frequent, every 2 months or so. Again, going through, we have a number of, we have 3 elementary schools within the district, a large middle school, and then essentially like a union high school. Just by way of example, there's like 2,000 kids on the corner of Dorset and Kennedy Drive here in South Burlington. So knowing who is responsible for what, having the opportunity to meet with the facilities folks and talk about, what's changed in the building. Like, we've added temporary classrooms to a lot of these campuses, and then had video angles been compromised or thought about in that process. That provides a lot of value to when you think about an incident occurring and you have all these same folks that are trying to craft the response to it. Again, the planning, relationship building, and knowing who your subject matter experts are across the enterprise, the school and public safety enterprise, is really invaluable.
Great. Thanks, Chief. Sunny,
Rob?
good stuff on that. I just want to say that as to mention to the audience that, Sunny and I are, again, always available to assist on the EOP development side. I would urge folks to focus on the Vermont School Safety Center's website, where all the planning, training, and exercise resources are located, and certainly reach out to Sunny and I if there's any assistance that you need. Sunny, do you have a quick comment?
I just sort of wanted to put out a reminder that, and I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but the importance of sharing like floor plans with your first responders so that they have familiarity of the layout of your buildings. And as Chief Burke said, sometimes, you might be adding a temporary outdoor classroom, or there might be construction. Just keeping them updated and familiar with those happenings is going to be really important. So sharing those floor plans, having them come and walk through, establishing those relationships is only going to benefit in the response.
Yeah, and same thing with access control, how they're going to get into the buildings during an emergency, right. Security camera footage, how they can get access to that as well. All key components and all part of meeting with your local, county, state law enforcement to ensure that they understand how they can get that.
One last point on that, remote access to the attendance software. So when we've dealt with incidents here, who's on campus, who isn't, and how can we quickly get the parental contact information so we can start making those connections with folks to figure out what's actually going on.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chief. Great point. Taylor, I think we'll turn it back to you for some closing comments and kind of wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Big thank you to Rob, Sunny, and Chief Burke for taking time out of your morning to share some really critical and invaluable information with us. Really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Last couple of items for our group today. I'm just going to drop a couple of links in the chat that just for awareness you might be interested in taking a look at. I don't know why my text is so big. That's an interesting thing. But I'm dropping in the chat right now a couple of links. So this first one is to a release of the Vermont Ed Funding report that just came out last week. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, it really does a good job of explaining kind of comprehensively how the Vermont Ed funding system works and how that compares to other states. So an interesting read there. And then I'm also dropping another link in the chat for the AOE Listen and Learn Tour kind of updates. We have added a few more dates to that. So if you're interested in participating either as an educator or just as a member of the public, you're more than welcome to do both or either or none if you so choose. But we do have that page available. There should be a registration link for the public session on that page. I'm also going to drop the link to the educator session because I don't believe that one is on the webpage right now. And again, if you have any questions and about anything that you've seen in this presentation today, and you're just not really sure where to direct those questions, feel free to start with me first. I just put my email in the chat, and then I will direct your questions to wherever they need to go. So thank you all again for being here today. We appreciate your time. Our next meeting is going to be on December 4th. So we'll see you all then. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.